Hello, everyone. Welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your typical normal host, Liam, aka Hembar. But today I have back on the channel. It's been a guest. He is a friend of mine. He is not a friend of the channel because the channel is not his own thing. It's just me. So it is Raph over here, of course. Um, Hi, Raph. How are you doing?
Hi, Liam. I'm good. I am getting out of weeks and weeks, well, at least 2 weeks of reading 19th century German literature, and then you asked me if I wanted to read some more 19th century German literature.
Happy to help. You didn't hit your quota, so I had to make sure. Um, um,
Yeah, I guess that's a punishment for me being behind on the Karl Mess thing.
Yeah, well, I was glad you're doing the Carl thing because I normally do a 12 days of Christmas thing too, and I didn't do one this year. Um, but
Yeah,
I'm not caught. In fact, I haven't watched any of your Carl videos. I'll have to do that. But
they are
but
interesting.
they definitely sound interesting from what I've seen of your
Yeah,
your like thoughts on mostly the that unabridged burners
yeah,
Discord.
yeah.
But um,
Yeah, I saw you commenting on Karl May throwing shade at the Book of Mormon
yeah.
for its style. He's like, well, he's pulling out a Bible quote and he goes, well, this is just so much better language wise than the Quran or the Book of Mormon. And I'm like, okay. Outside of any religious beliefs, I kind of have to give you that one.
Doesn't quite flow like the King James version, I guess. I don't know what the standard translation is in German, but
I mean, it might still be like depending on the time, it might just still be like the Lutheran one, the Luther one.
oh really? Okay, huh? Interesting, interesting. But we there are lots of merits of 19th century German anything
Yes,
for that matter, but German literature. So uh, the interesting thing actually is this. So this is the Nutcracker and the Mouse King, a classic
yes,
Christmas story in a sense. Um,
yes.
I would say it's probably not actually very popular reading in the English speaking world. I don't know about in Germany. Um,
I don't think it's read much anymore. It's definitely one of the Hoffman tales that are not read as much. I mean, everyone knows the ballet part, of course, right? I think that's sort of like the where this has moved to these days. So I don't know. It's also interesting to
right,
me that it is technically a Christmas story, but it starts at Christmas, and the rest of it takes place days later, maybe weeks later.
right. Yeah, in fact, it's starts on Christmas Eve, I think, which is like kind of a
Yes.
auspicious night. I know at least in a lot of traditions for like spirit. I mean, the Christmas Carol is a very obvious example in English, right? There's
Yeah,
ghosts, right?
and
But
the interesting thing there is that Germans are, we're efficient and everything. We do the Christmas gift giving on Christmas Eve.
oh, all of it on Christmas Eve.
Yes, yeah, you do that
Oh,
on Christmas Eve, which is called, it's called Holy Evening or Heiligabend in Germany, and that's usually when you do the Christmas giving, and after the Christmas giving, you go to church for the Christ Night Mass, if you're Catholic, that is, which starts at midnight,
right.
and after that, you stand outside the church in like freezing cold and drink mulled wine at like 2 in the morning.
Ah, nice. It's a nice tradition. Well, it sounds nice at least. Um, but yeah,
It
the
is. It can be really nice. If it starts snowing, it gets really, really kitschy, though.
huh. Well, yeah.
Uh,
I mean, and then well, the I know. So in German, the word for Christmas is well, it doesn't it imply multiple days, right? It's Weihnachten, right? Isn't that a plural?
Weihnachten, yes. So
Okay,
yeah, and it's 24th, 25th, and 26th, and the 24th is yes Heiligabend, so it's the holy evening, the same way that Halloween is the eve before All Hallows. So it's
right.
that same tradition, but for whatever reason, that's where the Christmas gift giving happens in a lot of places in Germany.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. See, I didn't know that. I know some places do like at the end of the 12 days, right? It'll be around
Ah, okay.
Epiphany, you know.
Yeah.
But interesting. Okay. I mean, it
Yeah,
makes
I
sense
mean the
actually
12th night. Yeah.
because if the idea is Christ is born, I know at least in most imagery he's born at night.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how accurate that is because of how they calculated days, normally beginning with sunrise. But
And I mean,
Either way,
to be fair, the written record doesn't actually specify anything around like times, weather,
it's
or anything
very
of the
vague.
sort.
Seems to
Yeah,
imply a spring birth even. But anyways, but
yeah,
tradition is fun. So anyways, you're right.
yeah.
It starts on December
On Christmas
24th,
Eve.
and then it just kind of unfolds. It's not really focused too much on Christmas, besides the fact that there is, well, I guess gift giving on December 24th, which didn't make sense in the text.
Yes.
So surprise. But it
Yeah.
is an 1816 story. I think is when it was first published, at least. Um,
Yeah, I think it was written and yeah, told around that time, and it took a while to get like officially published in book form, I think. Like it was published, I think in like a magazine or whatever, and then it got
yeah,
published in like a collection of stories a year later. And it's by E.T.A. Hoffman, which is like literally how the name is always brought up because the full name is somewhat a bit of a mouthful.
I can imagine. Um, but we have Raph over here who made his name less of a mouthful over here. He's just Raph Bloodox for us. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, it would be Rafael Maria, so
yeah, which
we got to
is
be careful with that kind of stuff.
sounds pretty Catholic. But anyways,
Well, it
so,
is.
look at
But
that,
yeah,
right on
it's
the money. Right.
it is a children's story. It's a fairy tale, um, in the interesting way that we have this in German, and I find this interesting. We have Volksmärchen, which is what you might call the your Grimm fairy tales, which are the people's fairy tales, and then we have Kunstmärchen, which are sort of like art fairy tales, which is if someone sits down and writes down a story that takes elements of a fairy tale, but it is written by one person, and we know the guy. So your Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales about the Little Mermaid and so forth, those are considered Kunstmärchen in that regard. And yes, Hoffman wrote some of those, like the Romantics. A lot of them wrote. Wilhelm Hauff is another one that wrote a lot of these fairy tales, although he took a lot of inspiration from the Thousand and One Nights, so from the Arabian Nights. So there's a lot of weird Orientalism happening in Hauff's sort of like fairy tales, but it's something that a lot of people at the time of the German Romantic movement were playing around with writing fairy tales in that style, and that's certainly what Hoffman does. But he does sort of twist it, I think.
Well, it's got an interesting, because I think fairy tale is a good label for it, because it's kind of disturbing, almost like those German fairy tales
Oh yeah,
tend to
yeah.
be. But it's also
It is
like
creepy.
it is definitely creepy. It's not quite as creepy as like the Sandman, but it's
Yeah.
definitely the thing for me, at least reading it, is that like it feels like almost more like it is a story about children than it
Hmm.
is for children in some sense. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
could
would
see it being
agree.
for children too, but I mean, like, it's just, it doesn't seem, when I think of stories for children, I know some German fairy tales obviously don't follow this at all. But that they're kind of like cute and here, right? And here's a
Mhm.
moral. Here's like this cute story. Everything is rectified at the end. You do kind of have that in this, but
Mhm.
it's not quite cute in the sense here, right? So
Yeah, I think. So here's the thing: it is a framed narrative, right? So we have the
mhm,
we have the tale within the tale, and the tale within the tale around the Nutcracker and the princess and the the Uber nut, whatever it's called. I keep forgetting the name. The nut that can't be cracked, and so forth.
right,
That tale does follow closer to sort of like the spirit of like an actual fairy tale with the princess and the the bad. Well, she's not a fairy godmother; she's a mouse in this case. But we have that sort of like whole set. That story does follow the idea of like a fairy tale much closer, and then you have the framing narrative around young Marie and Fritz, and that stuff is very much told more like about a story about children than it is anything else, right?
right, yeah. I mean, it does definitely have some elements that seem to it has moral elements, I would say. I mean, like, it
Oh
doesn't,
yeah,
it's not like very didactic in a sense, right? But
yeah,
it's like does show like loyalty, right, and friendship, and like the ending is very, how do I put it? Like
yeah,
it's a good ending in a sense, right? Like it's like yay, woo,
yeah.
at least in my mind. So
It is that. It's also very much a story that tells you that the military kind of sucks, which I found really interesting for like a story written in Germany in like 1816. That is, because it is very much a story about being German in the early 19th century in a lot of ways. And the whole setup at the beginning with Fritz and Marie talking about their presents that they are expecting for Christmas, and that they kind of know that those presents will be brought and bought for by their parents, but somehow are also connected to the child Christ. Because that's another thing in Germany. Gifts are not brought by Santa Claus; they are brought by the child Christ, which is why the Christmas market in Nuremberg, the famous one, is called Christkindl's market, which is the Christ child market.
yeah, huh,
So that opening conversation I found really interesting because it deals with like a lot of that stuff that we see in contemporary conversations about the spirit of Christmas and when do children realize that gifts are bought for by their parents and not actually brought by Santa Claus or some supernatural being or whatever. And to have that in like a children's story written down in 1816 felt very modern in a way.
yeah. It's a it. It's interesting because I think a couple Christmas stories I would say from the
Mhm.
19th century seem to kind of deal with that in a
Yeah,
sense, right? Like a Christmas Carol, for example, also is
yeah.
like not very Christian in a lot of ways. I mean,
No, no.
so um, and this story is about a Nutcracker and a Mouse King, and mostly focused on Marie, right, and
Yes.
her encounters. There is a bit of a like a psychological element that I think is pretty typical from what I can tell from Hoffman. Um,
Yeah.
but he is, and sorry, actually, this is an aside more so, but I will say even when he was writing this, Germany wasn't even unified, right? I think he,
No, no, this
um,
is like way before unification.
yeah, and he was, I think he's from what would be Kaliningrad now, even so, Prussia, very much not part of modern day Germany, but German
Yeah.
speaking and whatnot. But
Yeah, at the time it
from
was still Königsberg. I mean, this is right after Immanuel Kant was still hanging out in Königsberg, or well, now it is
yeah,
Kaliningrad. So this is Prussia. This is East Prussia.
yeah, but I don't remember actually if does the story have a defined
No,
setting? Okay,
it doesn't
yeah,
have any city or anything of the sort is named. It has the house of the family, that being the Stahlbaum family, and it has the one, uh, I guess, godfather. I mean, he's called Pate in German, so which is the yeah godfather.
hmm. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, the Pate is the person you have stand by during
Uh,
baptism. So
okay, yeah, sounds like it's like from Latin pater or something.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's the yeah, so it's godfather or godmother depending on gender, I guess. Which is tied to baptism in like a Catholic sense, and a Protestant one, I guess, as well. So, like for example, the German translation for the Godfather movies is also der Pate. So less clockwork and creepiness, though, slightly.
I think in some translations, or at least in some adaptations of this, he Drosselmeyer is actually referred to as uncle rather than
Okay,
godfather, um, which is not quite the same.
interesting.
Yeah, so,
I mean, the thing is, in a lot of ways, like very often, Pate is also called Paten uncle, so not godfather, but a god uncle, I guess, is like would be the translation. So that it
hmm,
does kind of make sense
interesting. Yeah,
because very often it used to be in larger families. It used to be an uncle who was, doing the whole baptism thing, and then
yeah.
supposed
So
to take over if your parents die, that kind of stuff.
right, yeah, kin relations. Um,
Yeah,
rather complicated. but makes sense. So interesting. Yeah. So we have that is actually I would say the main thrust, right? There's these children, and then well, actually they get a bunch of gifts if I remember correctly from
A
their
lot of
parents.
gifts. Yes.
Um, but their uncle Drosselmeyer has, or sorry, Godfather Drosselmeyer has has like he always does this like more spectacular um shebang
Clockwork stuff.
almost. Yeah, he is kind of a tinkerer. Um, actually, they did that weird. There's that weird thing that comes up in this book about the unscrewing hands thing that I think also comes up in
Yeah.
Sandman, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. These are very much concerns that Hoffman wrestles with in different iterations, like the idea of taking apart bodies and having clockwork bodies and stuff like that. That's something that he has a lot of, and there's always that sort of weird sort of switching between this being like actual clockwork stuff or like humans who are basically running like clockwork. I guess you can, you could
Mhm.
use like psychology to figure out what's going on there. Probably not a good idea though.
I don't know if you want to go into it, but uh, he's it is, but yeah, he makes this like big castle if I'm remembering correctly,
Yeah,
or with and there's like the soldiers, well I think they're hussars if I remember correctly, um, are those part
yeah.
of it? It's been a minute.
It,
I've read this a couple weeks ago. I should have reread it.
there are hussars in there as well. Yes, although the thing is, not all like there are also dragoons. I don't think it really matters. It's just like you have guys on horses with guns and sabers,
Right. Yes. Um,
cavalry.
and so it's supposed to be like a fun little like gift for the kids, but also it seems implied that it's not something they get to keep. It's like something they get to enjoy. Um, but
Watching.
yeah. Um, but what's interesting when you mention Hoffman's interest in mechanical stuff and whatnot is that Drosselmeyer himself seems to be like an autobiographical bit of Hoffman
Yeah,
himself, who supposedly even made a castle for some children
yeah.
of a friend who I think had similar names. Um, so
Yeah, and that's like a thing that you have with Hoffman a lot, that he does put a lot of like personal details into his stories in general, and yeah, so this makes sense. What I find interesting about the castle with Drosselmeyer though is that he creates these elaborate like clockwork toys that are interesting to play around with and so forth, right? That well, not play around with, like interesting to play around for the gift giver, and the children can only watch, which is not playing. And what happens throughout the story is, of course, that Marie does, in fact, sort of like interact with, well, the machines and everything in a different way. And it talks about that idea of like agency, I think, implicitly, where we have that he builds that castle, and then Fritz, the brother, is always asking, so hey, can you change this part and this part? Obviously, you can't, because it's a clockwork thing. It can only do the same thing again and again and again, and that's when the children
right,
lose interest and decide to play with stuff that they can actually make up their own stories about, and do things and like control up to a point.
right, yeah. It's a I think it's got a lot of fun stuff going on. I think maybe okay. I'm really bad at squaring out how things like this should be organized. But
Yeah,
I think as far as like that's the thrust as far as like the introduction of the story is concerned. Um, it does. We were kind of talking before we get into like kind of like a frame in a sense. Like there is a story within the story. How it correlates is kind of confusing when you're reading the story. In a little bit. I mean, well, I think the main hint that it is connected is that um, there's a character named Drosselmeyer in the story, and there's a character named Drosselmeyer in the story, right?
yeah,
Which is telling, obviously. And the story itself, though, kind of goes into um, some interesting, like, and dark um, places.
Yes.
It's disturbing in a sense. Uh, and that's definitely what makes me question the idea of like this doesn't feel like it's for children in a sense. Um, but
I mean, I, the whole like thing reminds me of this one part in The Simpsons. There's a Simpsons episode where they go to like a book fair, and this is one scene where Christopher Walken is reading fairy tales to children, and they're all incredibly scared by Christopher Walken being like his scariest Christopher Walken. And Hoffman telling this story to to his friends' children, Marie and Fritz, very much gives me the same vibes of like he's trying to tell a fun story, and everyone is scared because he's not able to actually tell a children's story without having, creepy clockwork machines and and stuff going on, and seven-headed mice and things happening there. It's
right,
like,
yeah, yeah. We have the seven-headed month. Oh my gosh! And then we also have the Pearly Pat, who has an
sharp
interesting.
teeth.
Yeah. Right. You have. Well, yeah. It's weird actually from the beginning, right? Because the child is born with like a full set of teeth, which is just like, and
Yeah.
he even says like, "Hey, I didn't even realize until later after like the curse has fallen on her. I think
Hmm.
that being born with a full set of teeth is kind of weird." So,
So maybe we should sort of like back up and do a quick sort of like rundown of what has happened so far, because otherwise we get into details and details and details without, and people might get lost. So what happens is it's Christmas Eve, right? And they get those gifts, and among all the other gifts, there's a Nutcracker, and Marie falls in love with that Nutcracker as a toy and goes like, I want to, do it. It's the Nutcracker version, like of like human shaped Nutcrackers, the kind of stuff.
yeah.
German toys have been creepy for a long time, I think. Just saying. And the her brother Fritz breaks the Nutcracker by putting in a nut that is too hard, and then Marie still cares for it. At night, she is still playing with her dolls when mice attack the cupboard with all the toys, and then there's a battle between the mice and the toys, and she helps the toys by throwing her shoe after the mice, and then she collapses and is also bleeding because she has hit her arm in the glass window of the cupboard. And while she is recovering from those wounds, her uncle or godfather Drosselmeyer tells her the story about Pearly Pat the princess and the mouse woman and the curse of the Nutcracker, um, and that's when we enter that second layer. It's a sort of like mouseception, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that, Raf. I am much of a scatterbrain. But and so yeah, we get into this like weird mouseception thing where there is a story about mice and another little girl, um, right, and a Drosselmeyer as well.
Yes. And that's
Which,
where things get interesting, because it starts out very much like your classic fairy tale, except that like it's all about sausages, which is so German. That was like one of the most German modes. Like the king wants to surprise everyone by having like a feast of the best sausages ever. So they are making different types of
right.
sausages.
If you ask AI to write a German fairy tale, no,
Yes. It's all about sausages, yes. So you have that sausage fest there, and and while the queen is making the sausages, her the mouse queen, she's not a, well, she's technically the mouse queen who is somehow related to the family of the king, um, asks for food or for part of the bacon that is put into the sausages, and she gets some, but all her family comes and eats of it as well. And then there's not enough bacon or not enough ham in the sausages, which makes the king very angry and depressed. And he summons Drosselmeyer, the astrologer, and the astrologer, and no, he's not the astrologer, he's the mechanic and something else. Um, and he builds mousetraps, and they kill all the mice except for the mouse queen, who leaves and well threatens and curses the family. And that's when the Princess Pearly Pat with all her teeth is born and protected
yeah,
by lots of cats.
right, yeah, which are the natural enemy of mice, of course. Um, not so much nutcrackers, but
Yeah.
um, and the story involves a nutcracker as well. Um, the story within the story, I should say. Um,
Yes.
well, the you said it's called the Uber nut, or what is?
I called it the Uber nut. It has a name. I forgot the name. It has like Kraka Kut or Toot or something like that. It's like this magical nut. So what happens is that the Mouse Queen curses the young Princess Pat once she gets past the cats, and that turns Pat basically into a nutcracker. She's a little girl, but she has the head of a nutcracker. It's
Yeah,
much larger than her body, and it even grows a beard and everything.
yeah,
So it looks, yeah. And poor Drosselmeyer and the astrologer are cursed. Well, they are threatened by the king with execution unless they find a way to change that. And they find out that to save the princess, they need to find that magical nut that cannot be cracked, the hardest nut ever to be nutted, um, and and a young prince or a young man that has not shaved yet and has never worn boots has to go there, and he has to crack the nut in his teeth and then feed the nut, that magical nut, to the princess. And then he has to close his eyes and leave backwards, walk backwards and leave. And then the curse will be broken. And then Drosselmeyer and the astrologer wander around the world to find that magical nut. And they finally find it with Drosselmeyer's cousin, brother, um, who accidentally has it for some really made up reasons, which is
after they
literally
travel for
someone,
quite a while, right?
yeah, for years, like 10 years or so, they're running around.
Yeah,
And then they decide to go back to the to the beautiful hometown of Drosselmeyer, which is Nuremberg or Nuremberg, um,
yeah,
for I don't know what reason. And that's sort of where they, find out that his brother has had the nut all along, and that his son would actually be is the perfect man to do the deed of cracking the nut. And then
yes,
and that's where stuff gets really weird, because the way it's described, his son is already a nutcracker, because his
yeah.
father then shapes like a strong uh what's it called, yeah, I guess at the end of it, like he has to basically braid his hair around down to his jaw, because that strengthens his jaw, and then he can actually crack that
Oh
hard
yeah.
nut.
It's, uh,
So he's already sort of described like a nutcracker. The same way that, like earlier, when Drosselmeyer tries to figure out what's wrong with Princess Pat, he unscrews her bit by bit and looks at her parts and realizes that he can't actually fix it. Which, yeah, it's weird.
yes.
Talk about body horror.
Yeah, and the whole thing with, like, to me, I mean, the never shaving thing to me implies he's just young, right? I
Right.
imagine though no boots does too, but I don't really get it. Um, because I don't understand how not having worn boots would imply youth. But in my mind, it's
Um,
setting up like a youth, like a youthful, like Prince Charming, though not a prince at all. In a
so
sense.
he is a guess with the boots. I'm not quite sure about the boots part, but my guess is that it means he hasn't yet joined the army, because that's kind of,
Hmm.
I mean, this is Prussia, right? This is like Prussia right after Frederick the Second and everything, right? Like, this is the most militarized society ever. So everyone goes and becomes a military guy at coming of age, and goes through like officer school, especially if they're somewhat um, well, bourgeois, or at least, or lower nobility, or anything of the sorts. And that's when you get your soldier's boots. And when you look at the design of your classic nutcracker, he looks like a soldier, right? That's the thing. He has a
Yeah,
uniform, he has boots and everything. So I would
which is
argue that's why the boots. That's why the
huh.
boots are mentioned and are important here. He's not yet that old.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then Nutcracker designs do definitely look outdated now. I had plenty of Nutcrackers like that when I was a kid. Um, I should get one. And, um,
You should
and
also get
hopefully
like one
no.
of those smoking. You can also get one of those smoking mannequin like puppets. They're made up in the same design. You can buy both of those at like Christmas markets, and you put some incense in. So you can open the puppet and you can put some incense in them, burn them, and then the smoke from the incense will come through the pipe of the thing
Oh,
that puppet is smoking.
I have some incense, so I gotta get one of those.
Once again, this is a very, it's part of like that very specific German tradition of like weird crafts.
You don't say. Anyway,
No, we're a weird country.
got the okay. This is what we're talking about early, right, in the 19th century marriage
Yeah.
of German and stuff.
Mm.
But yeah, it ends up that the curse is actually taken from Pearly Pat, but then it's actually put on the Nutcracker guy,
Yes.
which is, I can't remember actually the stuff that if there's much that happens in between it being removed from him, because it's
No.
removed from him like pretty much right at the end. Um,
No. That's the point. It's like he does all of the things, and on the way back, he steps back, and then the Mouse Queen sees that everything is going to be ruined, and he stumbles over the Mouse Queen, and he kills her by stepping on her with his
right.
new boots. And then
Oh,
the curse is switched from Pearly Pat, who looks like a beautiful woman again, and the young man who was beautiful before now has the oversized head of your classic Nutcracker. And when the princess sees that, he's no longer going to marry her, but he's supposed to, well, he's kicked out and spends his time since then as a Nutcracker and can only become human again, I guess, if someone loves him. But it's kind of vague, that part. He just like leaves and is like, the story, I guess, is the explanation of why Nutcrackers have oversized heads. That's sort of like the story behind that.
yeah. It's kind of confusing in some sense because it's just like, I mean, so essentially Marie like, not Marie, sorry, Pearly Pat.
Yeah.
Same thing. No, or well, it is Marie. No, I can't remember. Oh my gosh. Okay, essentially, love is confessed to him, and then, yay. Anyways, and
It's taken away, and he can only become normal again if he manages to kill the Mouse King, who is the son of the Mouse Queen, and who is a mouse with 7 heads, who have 7 crowns. And
right,
no beast of that type has ever been seen anywhere before, or will ever be seen anywhere again.
which is such a nutty image. My goodness.
Yeah.
The pun is on
Yes,
purpose.
7-headed beast with
But
7 crowns. Definitely nowhere before, never ever again.
and why mice? So that's the like the thing that I mean, like, are mice? Well, mice bother everyone in my mind, right? I mean, like, so they're
Yeah,
pests. They're not like the worst pests ever, right? It's not like you're having like cockroaches or rats. We talked about that, right?
yeah.
They're just kind of like a normal pest. I mean, that you have. Like,
Yeah, and like, I think it's partly because this is a story that is set in like a very specific, like upper middle class, early bourgeois sort of like family, and rats as a pest are very much associated with poverty and lower
right.
classes and so forth.
I
And this
mean,
is, yeah.
I've only ever seen a rat once, and it was in Las Vegas, which is not a very clean place in a lot of places.
Well,
So,
I've seen lots of rats because I have like lots of punk friends, so there's lots of people who have rats as pets.
oh, okay. Well, see, that's something else. But yeah, so, I've
But
seen
yeah,
lots
yeah.
of mice, but like out in the wild, only one rat. That's
Yeah, and mice are sort of like the more sort of like household kind of thing that you see at that time. You definitely still see a lot of in like houses, so that makes sense to go that way. Also, maybe it's a size thing because this is supposed to be about children, and so you don't want to introduce like rats. But I find the idea of like the Mouse King interesting because obviously we have the idea of the Rat King as a concept, right? The circle of rats that all their tails sort of like knotted together, that are considered, that are called a rat king, which is apparently something that happens sometimes in the world.
yeah, yeah. It's a. I thought it was an interesting choice, but I think it's kind of like you mentioned it, that it's that bourgeois. In fact, in English, the normal typical mouse can be called a house mouse, right, or a house
Yes.
mice in
Yeah,
particular.
it's a house mouse.
So
There's so many mice. I learned that from reading all those Redwall books. I know so much more
Oh yeah.
different mouse types now.
I have not read them, but I can imagine that that is will teach you that at least. Um,
Well, they have like the anarchist like shrews, which are some of the funniest things ever. The the
yeah.
guerrilla union of shrews in Mossflower, which is
Yeah. Well, it to me. So then it kind of makes sense that you like mice. You have them in your house. They are a bother still. They're still a pest. You don't want them, right? You know what I
yes,
mean? Um, the Nutcracker would be so a mice would be something a child would be familiar with probably.
yes,
And then the Nutcracker would be also familiar in this sense. Um,
yeah,
so I can't say my kids are familiar with the Nutcracker because I don't have one. That's why I need to get one. Anyway, but also they haven't seen the Nutcracker ballet by Tchaikovsky, but well,
yeah,
by Tchaikovsky, but it's much more whimsical than the story is actually, um,
yeah. That is true.
which is kind of what you would expect from the story. But again, that's mentioned before. The story is it's interesting because actually once you get to, I mean, a lot of the in particular, I think the aspects from the story within the story
Mm,
are fairy tale-esque. They're really not that bad. I mean, there's just like creepy aspects, right? Like the Nutcracker head thing curse is
yeah,
disturbing, or I mean, like describing like and Pearly Pat's young when she gets that curse on her.
yeah,
She's a woman when it is removed, or a young woman, right?
yeah.
But
And I mean, that's like your basic fairy tale motif, right? Like the young child is cursed at birth by the evil godmother, whatever, and then she ends up, either pricking her thumb and being asleep for like whatever, or
yeah,
being, locked up in a tower, or whatever else happens to princesses before they get like saved by the prince. But in this case, she gets saved by the prince, and instead the prince gets cursed, which is an interesting twist, I guess.
right, yeah, it's a continuation. Then that leads us to the Mouse King bit,
Yes,
which is in the title, of course. Um,
yeah.
um, which is kind of later in the story, actually. Um, in fact, actually, one thing I was thinking of, which is not related to the story proper, but the title of the Nutcracker and the Mouse King, I think it's shorter in German, isn't it? There's no articles.
No,
Is
it's
it
just like Nussknacker und Mausekönig.
in Mouse König? Is
It would be der Nussknacker und der Mausekönig, but it's just Nussknacker und Mausekönig.
yeah, okay. And that's a one word too, Mouse King
Yeah.
compound, I guess. Um, German tends to compound more than modern English
I
does.
mean, technically, so is Nussknacker, right? Nutcracker is also
Right,
compound.
yeah, and Nutcracker is compounded in English. So, why isn't Mouse King? Jeez, anyways, the things I sit and think about way too much. But because it doesn't matter. Anyways,
True. But yeah,
uh,
that's yeah. So yeah,
so but
once the
anyways,
story is told, then Marie realizes that her Nutcracker is in fact the old Nutcracker, and also the
right,
nephew of uh, the uh, Obergerichtsrat, whatever his title is in. I mean, technically, he's I guess a judge, but I don't know what it is translated in German because the titles are weird. Drosselmeyer, and she just assumes that the Drosselmeyer in the story and Drosselmeyer telling her the story are the same person. So the Nutcracker that she has saved so far is the nephew of her godfather, basically. She just assumes that. And then shit gets creepy because she wakes up with the Mouse King threatening her stuff. Well, threatening the Nutcracker, unless she does, in fact, sacrifice all of her Christmas cookies and stuff. And she does that, and the Christmas cookies are all eaten by the mouse. And then he threatens her again, her Nutcracker again, unless she gives up all of her sugar dolls, which is another one of those like creepy German things where we make people and animals out of marzipan and sugar, spun sugar, and so forth. And she sacrifices all of those as well. And then the Nutcracker wants the Mouse King the next time around wants uh, her clothes, her new dress, and her beautiful picture books. And that's when she says like, "Fuck it." I can't sacrifice those as well, because if I give him that, then next time around he'll probably eat me. And you never know. You don't negotiate with terrorists, I guess, is what we learned from this lesson.
Gotcha.
But she says that sort of like to the Nutcracker, and she hears the voice of the Nutcracker. Um, and the Nutcracker tells her that she just should give him a sword, because we forgot to mention this at the beginning. Yeah, the Nutcracker is broken slightly by her brother Fritz when he uses a nut
Right.
that is too hard, and then Drosselmeyer fixes the Nutcracker again by putting the teeth back into the jaw of the Nutcracker so he can be used to crack nuts again. But by fixing the Nutcracker, he takes away the sword. Once again, Nutcrackers do in fact look like both Nutcrackers look like old-timey soldiers. So a lot of them have swords. And after he's repaired, he doesn't have the sword anymore. And then Marie hears the Nutcracker tell her that he needs a sword, and then he can actually fight the Mouse King, and then all will be well. And she gets a sword from her brother Fritz's toy soldiers. Fritz gives her
Right.
that sword, and she gives it to the Mouse King and the mouse to the Nutcracker, and the Nutcracker then kills the Mouse King, and then everything is fine, except no one believes Marie.
Right. Yeah. There's the whole
Yeah,
time where, well, and it does seem like dreamlike in a sense, right? It is, the psychology of it is a little interesting, but it's also a child, right? So I mean, like, you have a child, especially when
yeah.
she's recovering. They're all like,
But
"Oh
that's
man, she's
that's
having
once
some
that's once
funky
again
fever
like
dreams."
really the parallels to the Sandman there are really interesting, because with the Sandman you have the same thing, right? Like Nathaniel or whatever his name is in the Sandman is also always
Right.
confusing sort of like reality and dream. So that confusion between reality and dream is something that Hoffman plays with a lot. Like in the Golden Pot, he does the same, although there it's more mythical and less creepy, and there's no clockwork involved, which you know is good. So that sort of like weird confusion between dream and reality is something that is very typical for Hoffman. But yeah, so she gets like the crowns, the 7 small crowns from the heads of the Mouse King. That's what the Nutcracker gives her. And after he kills the Mouse King and gives her those crowns, he takes her into the fairy kingdom. That's when stuff gets
Right.
like really weird, and very much the kind of thing that you would see in like a 60s Disney movie, though, the kind that has like flying pink elephants and heffalumps and woozles kind of thing, because it's all made of like different aspects of Christmas sweets in all kinds of ways. And there's rivers of lemonade and gingerbread castles and the whole thing.
Yeah. Right into Candyland, pretty much.
It
Um,
is basically Candyland, yes.
yeah. But it is a sort of. I mean, I like to look at it as a happy ending. It is kind of. Um,
But it has like the double ending, right? So he takes her there and then she wakes up in her bed, and it's supposed to be
yeah.
all a dream. And
Uh-huh.
then later on, Drosselmeyer, like her godfather Drosselmeyer, does in fact
Right.
bring her his nephew, who is, well, nephew Drosselmeyer, but also the Nutcracker. And then Marie becomes queen in Candyland, I guess. And I don't know how to take this, because this is like a very, very dark reading, of course, which is, if she imagined all of that and so forth, is she dead? And is that sort of like a
Some like
metaphor
Peter
for her
Pan stuff.
dying?
Yeah. Right.
Which is maybe just like, that's how German fairy tales sometimes go. Or is that just like real? And yes, all of it is real as written, or are there just like more metaphors there? Who knows?
Right. Yeah. I mean, as it is a very interesting story about
Yeah,
nuts and nutcrackers and um, mice. Uh,
definitely.
but it is. I don't know. I'm not gonna think about it if about it as a metaphor for dying. It may be. But I mean, like, at the same time, like, I think that is one thing that actually Hoffman does really well, is that he doesn't actually give you a ton of answers that
No,
are like clear cut. Um,
yeah, definitely. What I found interesting is the layers of irony. And, Hoffman, not necessarily known for his support of Prussian militarism or any of those kind of things in general. And that comes through from time to time. It comes through in like the way that Fritz is playing with his soldiers, and Marie going, well, he's played too much with soldiers, which is why he's like hard-hearted and cruel sometimes. And even in the fairy tale, within the fairy tale, the first part about Princess gods, I keep forgetting her name, um, Perlipat, Perlipat, um,
mhm.
um, that they knew that she was like a very good princess indeed, is because she bites the prime minister in the finger. And I'm like, that's a that's a very
Right. Yeah.
interesting one to go with there. And you have a couple of those sort of like elements throughout this story that are very much these aside sort of like aside comments on society, on the way society works. Like you have this how the doctor is constantly like every time someone is using their imagination, he's immediately diagnosing an illness of the head and prescribing rest and stuff like that. So there's this conflict that is obviously key of like any form of like German romanticism between the sort of like more rigid scientific aspects of enlightenment philosophy versus a more irrational like idea of the imagination, which makes sense because what with like in Prussia in particular with like Frederick II, right, you have that whole idea of like the enlightened monarch, and he hangs out with Voltaire and all of those people, and you have that very specific sort of like marriage between the Prussian military state as an enlightened state and military
Mhm.
and science being combined in a lot of ways. And if you're sort of opposed to that for all kinds of reasons, that irrationality is kind of where you need to go, because that's that's sort of like a conflict that is built into that sort of that aspect of like German romanticism, I think, and it comes up in these bits and pieces in here. And yeah,
Excuse me. Yeah. I think the whole German romanticism. I mean, often when I look at German romanticism, I'm thinking of like not literature. At least as an English speaker, because we don't. I mean, when I took a romanticism class, actually, the only text I read pretty much, besides some poetry from some English poets,
yeah,
was Goethe's Faust. um,
yeah, and
which
that's not really romanticism though.
right, yeah, we had talked about Sturm and Strong as well, but um,
Did
and
you
I
read
was
both parts or just the first one?
I only read the first part in class. I ended up reading the second part as well, where he does actually specifically make fun of Gothic novelists. But I think, I mean, I will say, having the little I have read, again, Goethe not really being super
Yeah,
romantic in a lot of ways, that the German romanticism stuff is creepier. Um,
yes,
it is creepier. I mean, there is still a sense of nationalism, uh,
yeah,
but
but it's
I
it's
mean,
and I think what's interesting with that is that it is a sort of like pan-German
mhm,
nationalism in a sense. So like a lot of that romanticism kind of leads into like the sort of like upheavals of like 1848 and the idea of like a German parliament and everything. So there is because as we said in the beginning, Germany is not unified at that time. It's still different parts and bits and pieces. And the romantics are talking about they're very much like in the sort of like aftermath of someone like Herder in particular, of trying to figure out what it means to be German, and that people living in Bavaria and people living in Prussia and people living in all these small principalities, all of them are German and they have like things in common. So it's an active project of establishing a German identity. So it's a
right,
national romantic sort of movement, the same way that you have your Ossian poetry in Scotland and your uh, rediscovery and like re-editing of the Mabinogion in Wales, and a
right,
lot of it later on your in Finland, your Kalevala and stuff like that. It's much closer to that project than to English romanticism of the Shelley and Byron kind of variety, I think.
Right. Yeah, where their identity would be more so on their empire. I mean, because England is pretty rigid,
Well established.
had been, and at that point, right? I mean, like, I mean,
Yeah.
another difference would be the focus. It's not here in this story really, but the focus on like forests that you get in German romanticism that you don't in
Yeah.
English
Well,
romanticism.
well, the Brits at that point didn't have any forests because they had ships.
Yeah, Sherwood's gone. Sorry, Robin Hood. Anyways, or well, it's pretty much gone.
Yeah.
So, um, but yeah, it's definitely, which is interesting actually, because I part of romanticism is so focused on nature, which again is really not really a big focus in the story.
Yeah.
Besides maybe the nuts, the heart nut. But and,
Yeah.
but the you would think maybe like that the English romanticists would be like, let's replant all our forests, and that
Yeah.
didn't happen, right? I mean, but I mean, you get some nice poems about nature, and I mean, I think actually when I think of German romanticism, I often think of uh, Friedrich, the art, his paintings and stuff. I
Caspar
can't.
David Friedrich, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah. That is certainly part of, like, you have a couple of like people that hung out together like in the early 19th century. Like, yes, Hoffman is kind of tied to that, and then you have like the two Arnims, Brentano, Annette von Droste-Hülshoff, those kind of people, and they're all writing. A lot of poetry is tied into that, and some stories. Friedrich Schiller kind of ties into that as well, right? What's it called? That famous poem about like nature and the Greek gods, and that's
I
sort of
don't
like a.
know.
It's super famous, but I can't remember. It's sort of like a lament about like how sort of like the Enlightenment and rationality have taken away like the powers of the voices of the muses and the Greek gods, and that one is much closer to your Byron and Keats sort of like approach
Yeah.
to romanticism in that regard. But then Schiller
Right.
also wrote, plays like Die Räuber, The Robbers, which is very, very much about like, freedom and and rebellion and stuff, which led to him, having to leave his part of Württemberg very quickly for a while.
Um,
I mean, I
yeah.
guess that's kind of the dangerous part. Like, being a romantic poet or writer in Germany still was actually dangerous. You can get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, the interesting difference, I think, because again, as I'm
Yeah,
not English, but I speak English, all right, as an American, and
yeah,
I'm much more exposed to the English side of romanticism. Um,
yeah,
I mean, unless it's Beethoven, I guess. But so,
yeah.
but but I remember we also went over stuff like um, Schubert, um,
Yeah.
uh, his like Erlkönig, König, um,
Alkönig,
Alkönig. Okay.
the Earl King. But I mean, that is already based on a poem by, I keep forgetting who that, but I think it's also either one of the Brentanos or one of those people. Yes, and that once again is like very much German romanticism of like the father carrying his like sickly dead child, almost dying child, riding through the forest, and the child is starting to speak to these to this weird spirit that and that wants the child to go with him into like wonderful places, and yeah, the child does, which means the child is dead. That's
Yeah,
German romanticism. It's like people riding through a storm in the middle of the night, and then the child is dead.
yeah, yeah. I think it's actually Goethe who did the words, and
That
Schubert did
could be, but there's like
seems to be.
more stuff like
But
that. Famous German romantic composer Karl Maria von Weber. He wrote Der Freischütz, which is an opera about hunting and hunters making a pact with the devil to have like magic bullets and to win a shooting competition. And obviously, stuff gets wrong and so forth. So there's an element of magic that is much closer to like what you might call folk magic, whereas like your
Hmm.
English romanticism often goes back to like the classics, to like especially Greece and some Roman elements, right? It's much more
Yeah,
Renaissance coded in that regard.
yeah,
German romanticism does have some of that, but it's very much also goes into like the creepy side of magic. It's like,
right.
you
I
know,
wonder if it's like French influence, um, or something. Because I mean, you'd still have folk magic, of course. It's funny because
I
romanticism's
think
also
it's
kind of focused on like rural stuff in some sense, but
yes.
the English don't seem to focus on rural folk magic really at all.
No, I think
So
it's also partly a more Eastern, like what you might call middle, uh, Central Europe these days, right? Like, because I mean, Germany or those different German-speaking parts. This is we already talked about it. It goes all the way to fucking Kaliningrad, and it's Bohemia, Moravia. It's what places like Czech Republic, Slovakia,
mhm,
Poland, all the way to basically parts of Ukraine, basically. And you have the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Habsburg Empire, so parts of Hungary
right.
and Romania and so forth. All of those elements tie into like German folklore in a lot of ways, and those never made it across the channel to England, so they are sort of like left out of like the English speaking version of romanticism, but they are very much sort of like woven into like the larger German or Central European sort of like elements of folklore.
Yeah, it's
And
interesting. Yeah, because in that kind of shows like later influence in a sense, and I
mm,
guess too showing later influence, more Eastern stuff for the more German stuff, and then for English,
yeah,
I would still say that probably French is influencing England a lot. Um,
yeah,
um,
definitely.
which I'm sure it's influencing German stuff too. Um,
Partly for sure, yes.
but yeah, it's a interesting stuff. But I think I mentioned this to you actually when I first asked you if you wanted to come on here, that I find like Hoffman stuff to be much creepier than any Gothic novel that I've ever read by some Englishman, right, or
Yeah,
Englishwoman for that matter.
at least the Sandman is really creepy. Like you read the Sandman
Yeah,
today, it is still very creepy.
yeah, it is a
Because
little disturbing almost, but
yeah, it's partly because he does have that element of like what I said earlier, the body horror. Like
yeah,
you have the whole like you have it in the Mouse King when it's about like unscrewing the body parts of the princess, which okay. and and in the Sandman, it's the whole thing about like the eyes, of like taking people's eyes and
hmm,
replacing them with like artificial eyes and stuff. And like that stuff is still creepy because eyes in particular are so sort of like central to our beings. Like you write a story about people taking your eyes or taking someone's eyes,
yeah.
that is creepy no matter when you write that. That
You're
stuff
gonna get
is
the heebie-jeebies,
yeah.
yeah. And it's not, I would say, like English like Gothic fiction and stuff, or even the
Mhm.
more Gothic romance lean focus like Ratcliffe stuff, but
Yeah,
is not, it's not that creepy, right? It's like creepy in implication, right? It's not
yeah,
creepy in like as so much as like harm is actually going to be done. I mean, there is stuff that happens. I mean, because obviously in like Frankenstein, there's stuff going on. And same with in Dracula and whatnot. But
yeah.
um,
And I think that is interesting to see because, like, yeah, like German romanticism, especially Hoffman in particular, is closer to like a Frankenstein. In particular, obviously with the building machines that might be human or not. That's a very similar sort of like vibe, and
yeah,
it's the same time, right? I mean,
yeah,
Frankenstein
early
was,
19th century. Yeah, it's right.
I think it was
1818, I think. 1819
1818
maybe.
for Frankenstein,
Yeah.
16 for the Mouse King, and I think the Sandman is around the same time. So
Yeah,
yeah,
probably.
but this
Yeah.
is also like only shortly after the famous Mechanical Turk. So the idea of building machines, like human machines, is still around, right?
Right. Yeah. Some like artificial
Artificial
being in a
humans, yes,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's they're appropriately creepy because I mean they're still creepy today.
yeah,
So like, um, but even then, I mean, because like I think in a lot of ways, like I think it might be the English style, right? Because well, Frankenstein does do Frankenstein's monster, I'd say in particular, does do
yeah,
bad things, the story itself isn't really scary. Like,
No, that's
um,
true.
it's like it's disturbing thinking about it in some sense, but the style itself doesn't really lend to horripilation of the reader, at least to the
Mm.
modern reader. Maybe the
Yeah.
Regency to like Victorian, like people would have found it like spooky and make them faint or whatever, right?
Mm.
But like to the modern reader, I don't have that experience at least.
I think what's interesting there, now that you bring that up, something that is in the Mouse King and that is sort of also in the Sandman is the rhymes. Like so the Drosselmeyer has this rhyme. Like we have that first one with the when the clock with the owl, when Marie seems to think or maybe sees Drosselmeyer be the owl on the clock
Right? Yeah.
in the living room, and then later when he sings that other song rhyme thing to her. And those rhymes are creepy in German. Like they are weirdly creepy because they sort of like repeat the same word and then just like swap out like a vowel. So it starts out with the correct word and then it sort of like swaps the vowel all the way around, like from through all the vowels to go back to the first thing. They are really creepy in the way that they sort of twist language.
Huh. Interesting. I will look at in German. Watch me rap. Anyways, no, I was gonna, but
Yeah.
I will say that most
And you
like
have the same
children's
thing.
or nursery rhymes
You
in
have the
English.
same thing in the Sandman, right?
Hmm.
Where the Coppelius and then later the Doctor is always having. He always has these like small rhymes about the eyes that he's taking or whatever. So that is a very effective technique. The same way that like children's like nursery rhymes can be incredibly creepy. It's a
Right.
tool that you see in like modern horror and horror movies and stuff like that as well. It's like, so
Right.
Hoffman is
Yeah.
very effective there.
Right. No. You're exactly right. Actually, that they are. Well, when children are singing them, just in real life, it's fine, right? Or "Ring Around the Roses" is really morbid, right?
Unless you
I
start
mean,
listening to the actual lyrics and go
yeah,
like, "Oh, fuck, yeah."
yeah. It's like,
Why
who
are all
taught the
these
first
children's
child that?
nursery rhymes about cruelty and mass death?
Yeah. Crazy. Wow. They learn at a young age, and that's actually one of the other themes, kind of what you were talking about in particular of the like the about like Prussian like sentiments,
Yeah,
is that the story doesn't really moralize the children to teach them to act like little adults, right? I mean, like
no,
you see that in like older movies even, or movies that are
yeah,
imitating older times, that like the well, hell, even the freaking The Sound of Music, right? The
yeah,
children fall into line in a sense to act like they are little soldiers almost, right? Um,
yeah.
right, and that the story in this case doesn't come away with that feeling in a sense, in my
It,
mind at least.
it not really. It kind of it almost goes against that because you have like
Right,
the slightly older sister Louise who is already teasing Marie for taking this seriously and believing in the Mouse King and everything, and her brother Fritz who is already slowly being indoctrinated into this whole like military thing because that's why he needs all these armies and stuff, and that's why he's already slightly more violent and everything. But the one who wins at the end is Marie because she does actually, believe and uses
right,
her imagination. That's why she gets the prince and gets to go to fucking
and
Candyland. And
right,
everyone
yeah.
else
She
is,
uses her virtues in a sense, right? I mean,
yeah,
she's the virtuous little girl in a sense.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And everyone else is stuck here in Germany and is getting ready to fight the French yet again.
yeah, right. Woo. Anyway, but it is right around that time, anyways, I guess. But
Yeah.
thinking of that publication year. But that's funny. It's actually when you talking earlier, you mentioned we don't negotiate with terrorists. Is that like Marie giving all her stuff to the mice? It reminds me of
Yeah.
like the Dane Guild, right? It's just the Mouse Guild or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Just like, so, but
Yeah. It kind of goes that way. It's like,
yeah, you got to be careful with that stuff, man. Um,
yeah.
I will watch out for mice next time I see them. And I will. I think I will get myself a Nutcracker to make sure, just in case, um, that if
Make
I
sure
do
he
have
has a
any.
sword.
Right, I definitely, definitely. I'll get one that smokes a pipe too, because why not? But but I think maybe we could end it there. Do you have any more like thoughts? I guess before closing. Or
Um, Not really. I think what is interesting in this one, and I think it's sort of like one of those things that makes a lot of these like art fairy tales, or like written by an individual author fairy tales of the 19th century, so
Mhm.
interesting. And it's a parallel to Anderson as well, right? Is the mix of the magical, the fairy tale esque part with modern day and modern concerns. Famously, you read, like, the little match girl, right? Which is about poverty and selling
Mhm.
matches, which is like a 19th century thing. And then it kind of switches and uses like the fantastic to mix that with like contemporary concerns, which is obviously something you don't get in Grimm's fairy tales, which are always set in this like vague whenever. And I
Right.
find that interesting because the Brothers Grimm are doing their fairy tale collecting right around that time, so you can almost see sort of like an element of sort of like appropriating that, or taking the idea of German fairy tales as a specifically German thing, and having people like Hoffman try to make that their own and twist it in a way, because obviously the legitimation on a part of the project of like fairy tale collection and folk tale collection and legend collection that the Grimms did is also part of that, like establishing like a canon of German tales and German
Right.
legends and so forth.
Identity in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. And Hoffman is sort of like using that language to give it his own sort of like twist and subvert it almost in a way. And I think that is interesting to see that even within that project of like German Romanticism, there are very disparate voices out there. That it's not everyone is deciding to go Germany this way. There was a discourse, there was a conversation about what it means to be German, and Hoffman is
Right.
certainly on one of the weirder sides of that. But he's still like a very important voice in that. When you read later stuff by him, like he has this called the Memoirs of the Cat Moor. I don't know what the English title is. It's written like the Memoirs of a Cat, who talks about all the humans that he has observed and stuff. And that's a really biting satire of like German romanticism and German nationalism, bourgeois lifestyles. It's really interesting. Um, so he always is sort of like on the outside of that project, but playing with it. And I think that is interesting to see how that sort of like works with a children's story, sort of children's story.
A sort of children's story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a, a good point. I do think it's interesting how they compare, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Thanks, Raph, for coming on. You can, in English and in German, you can find this story readily available to read. I
Yes.
mean,
It
it is.
is available for free because it's been out for like 200 years.
Yeah. So sorry we spoiled it for you. But
Yeah,
it is worth the read. Still, even if
definitely.
you
Yes.
got to the end of this and haven't read it, but
Yeah,
it
you'd
is.
be surprised by how scary clockwork can be.
Yeah, it is. It is surprising what can be spooky in a sense.
Yeah.
Anyways, but anyways,
Yeah.
but yeah, we'll end it there, I guess. So Merry Christmas, even though it's over. But so but
Yeah.
Liam from Liam's Lyceum with, again, friend of Liam, Raph. Uh,
Yes.
so and
Yeah.
yeah,
Thanks for having me on, and
yeah,
cheers and
yeah.
everything.
Cheers, cheers indeed. I'll